As the Republicans turn their attention to the southern states, will the long primary battle to choose a presidential candidate weaken the eventual nominee? You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. The focus of the primaries to choose a Republican presidential candidate now moves to the southern states. It follows Mitt Romney's victory in 6 of the 10 states up for grabs on Super Tuesday, but he failed to deliver the fatal blow to his rivals. And so the march to the finish line continues. Next up on Saturday, we have Kansas. On Tuesday, Alabama and Mississippi. Shortly after that, Missouri and Louisiana. The area is known as the Bible Belt, where a majority of Republicans are born-again Christians. And it's this demographic, the socially conservative evangelicals, which Mitt Romney struggles to win over. This is likely to only prolong the battle. Another issue being discussed is whether Newt Gingrich should step aside and let Rick Santorum go head-to-head with Mitt Romney. At the moment, the conservative vote tends to be split between Gingrich and Santorum. And then there's Ron Paul, who, despite not winning any states, is still in the race. He is vying to press on. He wants to pocket enough delegates to be influential at the party's nominating convention in August. So, will a long, protracted primary battle hurt the eventual nominee? To discuss this and more, we're joined by Peter Fenn, who's a Democratic strategist. He helped with the Obama campaign in 2008 and served as advisor to both John Kerry and Al Gore during their presidential campaigns. Michelle Goldberg is in New York. She's an author who's written a book about the evangelical movement called Kingdom Coming, The Rise of Christian Nationalism. And Ford O'Connell is a Republican strategist and former presidential campaign advisor. Welcome to all of you to the show. To start out, let's look at the state of play. Let's see where we are in the delegate count. According to the Associated Press, former Governor Mitt Romney leads the nomination race with 415 delegates. That's more than all of his rivals combined. Rick Santorum is second with 176, with Newt Gingrich on 105 and Ron Paul on 47. Ford O'Connell, let me start with you. How do you see these southern state races unfold? I mean, not much love we know down there for Newt Gingrich. At least for Mitt Romney. Newt Gingrich is still in the race because of his win in Georgia. And it appears Santorum's in a good position. How do you see it all unfold?
Well, the best thing happening for Mitt Romney right now is the fact that Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum are vying for the same voting bloc. Actually, 2 polls right now out of Mississippi and Alabama actually are showing Mitt Romney within striking distance, and he could actually possibly take one of those states. And if he does, I think as time moves on with, out of the March calendar, which is not very friendly to Mitt Romney, he could wind up having the race wind down. Because the question is Mitt Romney's going to be the nominee? The only question is when. Okay, let's go to Michelle Goldberg in New York. Michelle, we often hear that Mitt Romney has a problem in these southern states, especially with the evangelical voters. What exactly is that problem?
I think it's twofold. I mean, part of it is simply religious. There's a block of voters who are not comfortable voting for a Mormon. I've heard people say things like, now when these missionaries knock on doors, they're going to be able to say, let me tell you about the faith of our president. And some evangelicals belong to churches like the Southern Baptist Convention churches that are in heavy competition for converts with the LDS Church, and and they're seeing a lot of their own people kind of convert to Mormonism. Mormonism is the fastest growing religion in the world, and so for them, kind of legitimizing Mormonism is a very, very serious thing. But beyond that, there's also just a kind of cultural disconnect. Mitt Romney can kind of keep saying that he's really angry and that he kind of shares their resentment, but they essentially know that Mitt Romney doesn't share their same kind of ethos. He's not a cultural populist. He comes, if anything, he's even more of a kind of establishment Northeasterner than Barack Obama is.
Peter Fenn, you've worked in some of the previous races, the nomination races, the battles as well. When you look at the race right now and compare it to, say, the battle between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama back in 2007, what do you see?
Well, there's a world of difference between the two races. First of all, in 2008 at this time, according to a Pew poll, about 80% of Democrats were satisfied with the 2 candidates. This primary season has resulted in just the opposite effect. Most of the polls, again, Pew had one, about 40% of the people were satisfied with their with their field, and 50% of folks, according to another poll, would have preferred somebody else. So you've seen these negatives rise up for all the candidates right now. Now, can that be overcome? Sure. Possibly it can. But you don't want to start underwater, which is where Mitt Romney is right now. The other thing, though, I would say is, and Ford is right on this, I mean, Mitt Romney wants to put this away quickly. He doesn't want to take this to June to win his final delegates in the 1,144 out of California. I would say the majority. Mm-hmm. But he wants these candidates to say, okay, I'm done, throw in the towel. And by winning southern states, if he can do this, if they can split the vote 3 ways, and he comes out on top, he has more of an argument for that. But because he's got to do something about those negatives that have risen so precipitously during this primary season.
And Peter, to your point, the longer this race winds on, those negatives become a bigger issue because Mitt Romney will have to turn and sort of smooth it over with independents and Hispanics. But I think one of the big issues here that sort of caused this dissatisfaction is the fact that we changed the delegate rules.
Right.
And we changed the delegate rules with a popular incumbent in the White House. As such, everything that the candidates do within the Republican race is magnified, whereas in 2008 the media was sort of split between watching President Obama and Hillary Clinton duke it out versus John McCain and Mitt Romney.
And it's so interesting to look at these changes in rules because, what Ford's talking about is that for quite a while we've had proportional rules for most of our states. Usually the Republicans have had winner-take-all states. And what allows Mitt Romney to be confident going into the future is it's more of the proportional, and he's going to be able, even though he doesn't win states, he still gets delegates.
3 yards.
And that hurts a candidate's ability to get momentum, right?
It does. Under our old rules, it was very easy to capture lightning in a bottle and sort of wrap it up by the time we got to Florida. But with the different regions being factored in the calendar, if you're strong in one region and not in another, you can have momentum and then it's zapped out of you. And that's really what Mitt Romney's been saying because he's strong in the East and strong in the West, not as strong in the Midwest and obviously not the favorite of the South.
All right, let's go to Michelle Goldberg in New York. Michelle, it seems that the voters, especially in the South, in these southern states, are not happy with any of the candidates. They're kind of looking at the best of the worst right here. So who is the best of the worst?
Well, it's amazing. I mean, I can't think of any other race in modern history where the inevitable nominee was so out of step with the majority of the party. I mean, sometimes people compare Mitt Romney to John Kerry, but John Kerry was a liberal who had a kind of history of progressive activism, what had been at one time a hero to many people on the left. So even if people weren't incredibly enthusiastic about him, there was a broad sense that he was good enough or that he would do. Whereas you have now the most right-wing Republican Party in modern history that's about to be saddled with a nominee that doesn't share any of their core convictions, if he has any core convictions at all. Right. I suspect that a lot of them, for a lot of them, it seems like Rick Santorum is quickly becoming the not Romney. I expect him to do really well in the South. Right. But people know at this point, or at least most people know at this point, even if they're trying to tell themselves otherwise, that it's going to be Mitt Romney. So in a certain sense, it's almost a kind of desperate protest vote at this point.
Let me just make this one point, because Michelle's right. I mean, one of the crazy things about this process is that if you had Ron Paul out of the race, and if you had Newt Gingrich out of the race, most of those votes do go to Rick Santorum, and if he gets him one-on-one, the wheels could come off the bus. Romney, but the likelihood of that happening is so slim. I will make one other quick point on this. Looking back at history, the one candidate that had the kinds of negatives and the kinds of problems in recent history that Mitt Romney has was really Bob Dole. Bob Dole, at this point in the spring of 1996, his negatives were a good deal higher than his positives, and he was never able to recover. But his negatives, I've seen those
numbers. His negatives were still not as high as Romney's were.
That is true.
That is true, but one thing is we're saying...
Ford, I'll get to you in a moment. We just want to take a listen to what the candidates have been saying, and especially in view of what Peter said about the pressure on Newt Gingrich to step out. Now, following Super Tuesday, there's pressure on Newt Gingrich, as we've been saying, to get out of the race. Here's what Rick Santorum said on Thursday. Let's watch.
When it becomes a two-person race for the Republican nomination, the conservative will win that nomination.
And we are staying in this race because I believe that it's going to be impossible for a moderate to win the general election. We tried it in 1996 and it didn't work. We tried it in 2008 and it didn't work. You can't have somebody where the gap between Romney care and Obamacare is so narrow that you can't figure out what the debate is.
Ford, we've heard what they're saying there. Is that going to hurt hurt the eventual nominee, hurt the party's chances in the general?
I don't think so. And the reason is because the president has Obamacare. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to help Mitt Romney in the ways that he'd like it to help him. But what I wanted to say was with the delegate rules and sort of making a one-on-one competition, where the Republican Party really made a mistake was when they changed the delegate rules. They didn't think that 4 credible candidates could be in a race, a credible candidate being someone who got 20% or more. So when they're going to have to retinker with these rules. And secondly, within the Republican Party, we're seeing something we haven't seen since 1976, and that's the head versus heart debate. And what's basically happened, we saw with Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan, and this is really where the Republican Party is going. Does it want to be the party of conservative ideals or the party of the status quo? And that's really what we're saying, on top of everything else. But if they can unify in time and get behind it, then this is going to be a very close general election, deciding a handful of states given the state of the economy and rising gas prices.
The scary thing about this, though, right now for the Republicans is they have not been concentrating on the economic issues. They've been recreating the culture wars. And it's crazy. I mean, Limbaugh, if I were advising Mitt Romney and Rush Limbaugh had said the kinds of things repeatedly that he said, I would have said to him, this isn't a question of the choice of words. I wouldn't have chosen those words. He should have come out against Rush Limbaugh right then and there. Why didn't he? Because he's terrified of the right wing of the Republican Party.
But is the reason?
But isn't he right to be terrified of them? I mean, in a way, obviously, the decent thing to do would have been to come out against Rush Limbaugh, and the smart thing for a general election. I mean, a lot of people have said this could have been his kind of Sister Souljah moment when he distanced himself from the crazies in his party. But the thing is, he needs those crazies right now.
That's right,
Those are the people who vote in Republican primaries.
Right. Ford, I'm wondering, the focus on social issues, and as Peter said, there hasn't been a focus on economic issues. Is the reason for that because it's the base of the party, and those social issues resonate with that base? They're the ones who select the nominee. And perhaps we'll see a shift after we know who that nominee is.
To the general electorate, economic issues trump social issues.
Right.
And within the Republican
but
Party...
not to the Republican Party electorate.
But within the Republican Party, they trump it, but not as much. The difference between social issues and economic issues is not as big a gap as it is in the general electorate. And then one of the big issues with President Obama that the base of the party finds annoying is the fact that he has his government knows best policies, and to them, when they feel that the government's intruding on them, they're going to cling to the social issues because that's the mantle that they care about.
It's so strange that in a year when economics are front and center, jobs, the state of the economy, even questions about the deficit, that these social issues are coming up. Usually you find social issues coming to the forefront when the economy is doing fine, when we're at peace, when things are looking good. Then folks get all riled up about this. And let me just make this one quick point, and that is that I think it has defined the Republican Party and defined these Republican candidates in an incredibly negative way, which they are going to have trouble getting out of as they move towards.
Well, let's remember how social issues came about. We had 4 candidates who basically had a similar economic platform. And then Rick Santorum started finding a way to differentiate himself by talking about social issues. Right. And when his numbers were shooting up on the polls, everybody else said, oh my gosh, he's got a foothold. I should try to do the same thing. And the next thing you know, Rick Santorum thought that was a winning strategy. And as an undisciplined candidate who can't keep his mouth shut, he overtalked the issue. And as a result, everybody went with him.
And when Newt Gingrich is the moral force, we all know we're in trouble.
Let's go to Michelle Goldberg. Michelle, when we look at these races that are coming up in the South and the fact that social issues are dominating the debate in the Republican Party right now, are we going to see all the candidates being pushed even further to the right?
Well, at a certain point, how much further to the right is there? I mean, all of the candidates except for Mitt Romney support a total ban on abortion without exception, even for rape, incest, or when a woman's health is at stake. I mean, that used to be a really fringe position in the Republican Party, even, 4 or 8 years ago. Now it's the norm in the Republican Party. I'm not sure how much more right-wing you can get short of saying that women who have abortions should be kind of hung in the public square. And so I do think that you are going to, that they're they're going to kind of keep beating these drums. Obviously, Mitt Romney doesn't want to talk about this stuff. He's very uncomfortable. But this is what the Republican electorate cares about, you know, and it's been clear for a while that despite all the hype about the Tea Party being a libertarian movement, that the Tea Party is really substantially, not totally, but substantially the old Christian right in a new guise, and that its fundamental issues are a kind of cultural populism and a sort of apocalypticism about that conflates the growth of government with something kind of much more sinister and evil. And so for a lot of people in the Republican base, there's not that much of a difference between economic issues and social issues. You know, Rick Santorum says all the time that government can only grow in the face of social breakdown, and that really churches should be providing the safety net rather than the government. So there's not kind of a strict divide, as there is, I think, for a lot of people outside of this movement.
Well, I'm not sure that that's entirely true in the sense that sort of characterizing the Tea Party as a national movement, you can run into some issues. But if we look at it by region, what you're saying, though, is within the South and the lower Midwest, social issues become much more prominent. I'm not sure that's really ever changed. I think the media's caught onto it more. And I think with a lot of sort of covering a lot of these different events, I think that, you know, people are becoming more aware that people in the South and the lower Midwest tend to rank social issues as very important, whereas people in the East and the West do not. I think that a lot of people forget that we are really, you know, one country but with 5 different regions, and sometimes we sort of try to put all of them together.
And the other problem with this is that Romney has not been consistent on any of these. Well, I'm more pro-gay rights than Ted Kennedy. You know, I'm for keeping Roe versus Wade. You know, I'm for gun control. You know, suddenly the poor guy has to not just do a little 45-degree move, he does a full 180.
Well, how many Republicans are there in Massachusetts?
Well, I understand the Massachusetts problem, but that's, you know, that's the difficulty now is that people don't trust him.
He does have a credibility problem, doesn't he? I mean, he flip-flops on a number of issues. And the other thing is that he tells different audiences different things, doesn't he?
Well, that's politics. Yeah. You know, I promise you,
well,
if we were watching
all politicians do that to an extent, but he is a kind of hyperbolic
But his
version of
credibility issue is a bigger problem with the Republican base than it is with the general electorate, because the positions he's flipping from are not issues in the general election. Yeah. They're issues in the Republican primary.
See, this is where I disagree with Ford. I'll tell you, I think this is less about the flip-flops. I mean, you remember, the folks, this is hilarious. They're good friends of mine. The guys that are doing the campaign for Mitt Romney right now did the campaign against John Kerry. Remember the ad where he's windsurfing, he goes back and forth, the flip-flop? I'm for the war before I'm against it. Well, they did that stuff. Okay, flip-flop is one thing, but the problem Romney has, I think, is more one of trust. Can you trust this guy? Does he believe in anything? Does he have a core? He is going to have to convince voters, and I'm talking about general election voters now, by November, that he indeed does really believe in something, that he really is consistent. I disagree with that. Pardon me?
I actually, in a certain sense, he actually is kind of helped, I think, in the general election by his inauthenticity on these issues, because it's going to allow a lot of people who might be terrified of a referendum or terrified of the religious right to say he just, you know, he just said those things, but he's not really going to change the status quo.
Doesn't really believe them.
Well, the great thing is this whole election comes down to a handful of states. Right, I'm going to be honest.
Talking about, as Michelle puts it, inauthenticity. I mean, Mitt Romney has highlighted his own disconnect with Southern voters, calling the upcoming primaries there an away game. And during an event in Mississippi on Thursday, Romney said that one supporter is giving him a little tutoring on the local culture. Let's listen.
He is now turning me into an unofficial Southerner, and I'm learning to say y'all, and I like grits, and strange things are happening to me.
He's got a problem, hasn't he, Ford?
You know, Mitt Romney is somebody who's not comfortable in his skin. Yeah. Let's just get it out on the table. That's his #1 problem. But where Mitt Romney is good is when he's focusing solely on the economy. And if he doesn't overtalk it, and he keeps his messages short, and he lets people know that what he's first foremost concerned about is rolling up his sleeves and improving the economy in this dilapidated economy that we have right now with rising gas prices, he actually has a chance to knock off a very popular incumbent.
And Ford, you know, is right about that in a sense. I mean, if he comes in as the Mr. Fix-It, this economy suddenly starts to dip and go down. We have real problems in Europe. You know, I mean, I think almost anybody could beat Barack Obama if we go up to 9% unemployment again and folks are angry and scared and mad. But You know, I don't think that's going to happen. And then one problem that Mitt Romney also has, if this employment picture is looking up, if people's confidence is up, his argument for being elected, that he's Mr. Fix-It, has a problem.
Well, that's true, and that's something I should worry about. The other thing, though, that President Obama has in his back pocket and his secret weapon is the Hispanic vote. That is where my guys, the Republican Party, in this sort of divisive primary that everybody's been able to watch, have really hurt themselves. And that's why they have to have Mitt Romney be the nominee now, because the amount of time it's going to take him to smooth over some of his stances, he isn't going to have a lot of time if we come out of it in June, because President Obama knows that Hispanics are the secret to winning re-election.
If he can turn them out. If he can turn them out. Big problem.
Okay, let's go to the role that Ron Paul is playing in all of this. Now, Ron Paul is regarded by many as a fringe candidate who hasn't won a state, but he has a loyal and impassioned following, and he has a strategy to win as many delegates as he can so he can have influence at the Republican convention, which will be held in August. Let's listen to what he has to say.
I don't care about power, but I care about influence, and the best way you can influence a nation and move a nation is by translating this into political action that is successful.
Let me ask Michelle about this. What is Ron Paul's role in this?
Well, at this point, his role is bolstering the campaign of Mitt Romney. You know, he's kind of played the role of Romney's sidekick in a lot of these debates. He attacks everybody else, and he never really goes after Romney. Right. And he's getting a lot of votes that would probably otherwise go to Gingrich or Santorum. And so, you know, there's been a lot of speculation, I think, about whether or not this is deliberate. But whatever his motives, that's the effect.
You know, you talked earlier on about the general election. Now, recent polls, including the latest from the Wall Street Journal and NBC News, show President Obama leading all Republican challengers. Against Mitt Romney, he's tipped to win 50 to 44%. Ron Paul trails Obama by 8 percentage points, with the president getting 50% support to Paul's 42. Faring worse than Paul in a matchup with Obama is Rick Santorum. He is behind by 14 percentage points. But it's Newt Gingrich who's worst off, trailing the president by 17.
Well, that's why it's going to be Mitt Romney's going to be the nominee. And really the whole general election comes down to one question. Can Mitt Romney win Florida, Ohio, and Virginia? If he can do that, President Obama will be out of a job.
You know, we often hear about this inevitability argument. Well, there's still a lot of other states in play.
There are other states, and you know, the math matters argument is important. But you know, if the wheels do come off the bus, as I talked about earlier, if what happens is that Santorum becomes the alternative, Gingrich is out, Paul's vote gets minimized, and he starts to beat Romney in a bunch of states, then what you have is a chaotic convention. Then you have a situation where Romney doesn't get to that magic majority number of delegates because folks start to come off him. And then the real problem would be if you go to a convention and you have the superdelegates. Those are the elected officials. Mm-hmm. Those are folks that don't come in, and they begin to call the shots, and they go to Romney when he's been losing. Then you've got a very big problem. Now, I happen to think that scenario is fairly remote.
Yeah, I think that scenario is something that we journalists and Democratic operatives kind of fantasize about, but it seems like it would almost be too delicious to be true.
Well, I will say this, that is far more likely than Rick Santorum being the nominee.
I'll tell you,
I will be honest with you.
The thing that scares the pants off me is we wish for something and we get it, and suddenly we have another candidate in this race. Suddenly we have, Mitch Daniels gets pulled in, or a Jeb Bush. They become the knight on the white horse. Right. They come rolling in September. Holy cow, Katie, bar the door. I mean, I've had that happen to me in races. And
it's
very
interesting.
Scary.
I mean, for a long time, I feel like, whenever I spoke to liberals and Democrats, they would kind of be happy to see this race being dragged out as long as they could, because they thought that Mitt Romney posed the greatest threat to Obama. And I'm starting to hear Democrats saying, you know what, I just want to see them lock it down, just like lock it down with Romney, because we want to make sure it's going to be him.
Yeah. But Michelle, in the old days, you would be completely right, because campaigning was so much different. In the super PAC era, with the ability to throw money and ramp up a campaign up and down, we can actually go with a contested candidate if it's a Mitch Daniels or a Jeb Bush.
That's where we're going to have to leave it. Time has caught up with us, and that is it from the Inside Story team in Washington, D.C. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And, of course, we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.